Hello, guys. My name's Alex, and I never thought I'd be sharing my personal life with a bunch of strangers online, but here we are. Life's weird like that, right? You think you got everything figured out, and then bam, it throws you a curveball you never saw coming. So here I am, putting it all out there because honestly, I don't know what else to do. I've been married to my wife, Sarah, for 7 years. We met on an online dating site, which was honestly a huge shock to everyone who knew me. See, I was always the guy who rolled his eyes at people swiping left and right, thinking online dating was just for desperate people who couldn't meet anyone in real life. But Sarah, she changed my whole perspective on that. I still remember the first time we met in person after weeks of messaging back and forth. She walked into that little coffee shop downtown, all confidence and smiles, and I swear I thought I was dreaming. She was beautiful, smart, and had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world when she talked to you. I fell for her hard. Before I knew it, we were spending every moment we could together, and a year later, we were standing in front of our family and friends saying, I do. I thought I hit the jackpot. Our life together seemed perfect. We bought a house in a quiet little neighborhood in New Jersey, got a dog, and started planning for the future, traveling, maybe even starting a family. I was the guy who thought he had it all, a beautiful wife, a stable job, and a happy life. I trusted Sarah with everything, and I never in a million years thought she'd betray me. But, they say if something feels too good to be true, it probably is. Yeah, I should have listened to that little voice in the back of my head because, as it turns out, I was living a lie. At first, I ignored the small things. The way she'd smile a little too much at certain text messages, the way she suddenly started taking more care with her appearance for work events, and the way she got strangely defensive when I asked about her day. But I was too blinded by love, or maybe just too naive, to see what was happening right in front of me. Now, here I am. I can share this because I've finally pieced it all together. I know what she's been doing behind my back, and I know exactly who she's been doing it with. And trust me, I am not the kind of guy who just sits back and lets people walk all over him. I've got a plan. Before I dive into the mess that is my marriage, there's something you should know about me. I'm not just some clueless husband who stumbled into a bad situation. I've got a background that Sarah never knew about. Long before I met Sarah, I worked in a specialized field. Let's just say I wasn't exactly sitting behind a desk crunching numbers all day. I used to be a part of a special operations unit, one of those jobs that come with a lot of training, a lot of travel, and a lot of secrets. Surveillance, tracking, infiltration, I did it all. And even though I've moved on from that life, those skills, they don't just disappear. Sarah had no clue about my past. To her, I was just a regular guy working a boring corporate job. She thought I was the type to come home, crack open a beer, and watch the game on TV without a care in the world. And to be fair, I let her believe that. It was easier that way. The truth is, the things I've seen and done, they're not exactly dinner table conversation. But when I started feeling like something was off with Sarah, those instincts kicked back in. The way she started acting, distant, secretive, and always glued to her phone set off alarms in my head. I knew something wasn't right, and I wasn't going to sit around hoping for the best. So before I left for a business trip a few weeks ago, I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I installed a hidden camera in her car. It was small, discreet, and perfectly placed so she'd never notice. I also activated an old tracking device I had lying around from my previous work. Yeah, I know how this sounds, but trust me, when you've been trained to catch liars and cheaters, you learn to trust your gut. I told Sarah I'd be gone for a week, heading to Chicago for a conference. She kissed me goodbye at the airport like everything was fine, like she wasn't hiding something from me. But the second I was out of sight, the real test began. The first few days were quiet, her driving to work, stopping at the grocery store, running normal errands, but then on the third day I saw it. The tracking app pinged a location that didn't make sense. A house. Not a store, not her office, some random house in the suburbs. And not just once. She went there 3 times in 1 week. And the worst part? That address belonged to my best friend, Jack. I remember sitting in my hotel room, staring at the screen, feeling like my entire life had just crumbled in front of me. Jack, my closest friend, the guy who had been my rock for years. And Sarah, the woman I trusted with everything. Together. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I watched hours of footage from the car camera, hoping, praying I was wrong. She was in his driveway, getting out, looking around like she was checking to see if anyone was watching, and walking straight into his house like she owned the place. That's when I knew this wasn't just some innocent visit, and that's when I decided I wasn't going to confront them like some sad, betrayed husband. No, I was going to make them pay. I cut my trip short and came home earlier than planned. I didn't tell Sarah. I wanted to see what she'd do if she thought I was still out of town. That Saturday night in New Jersey was quiet, but inside me, a storm was raging. I knew what I had seen, I knew where she had been, and I was done playing dumb. When I pulled into our driveway, everything looked normal. Our house, standing there like nothing had changed, but everything had changed. I didn't even get out of the car right away. I just sat there, staring at the front door, thinking about how many times I had walked through it, trusting that everything inside was as it should be. I finally went inside, and there she was, lounging on the couch with a glass of wine in her hand, scrolling through her phone. She looked up, shocked. "Babe, you're home early? I thought your conference went through next week." She played it off well. Too well. The forced excitement, the way she blinked a little too fast. My gut clenched. I shrugged, tossing my keys on the counter. "Got done early. Figured I'd surprise you." She laughed, that fake, airy kind of laugh. "Oh, that's sweet." But I saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers gripped the wine glass just a little too tight. I watched her closely that whole night, playing along like the oblivious husband she thought I was. The way she barely looked me in the eyes, how she kept checking her phone every few minutes. When she thought I wasn't paying attention, she'd turn the screen away from me, but I didn't need to see it. I already knew. The tracking device in her car had confirmed my worst fears. She had been to Jack's house 4 times in the past week. Not just quick stops, either. Hours spent with my so-called best friend behind closed doors. And the car camera? Yeah, it caught enough to rip my heart right out of my chest. Whispered conversations, soft giggles, and the way she touched her hair every time she walked up to his door. I didn't say anything that night. Instead, I waited. I needed more proof, more leverage. The next morning, she woke up early and told me she had to run some errands. I watched her through the window as she drove off, pretending I was still half asleep. The tracking app pinged within minutes. She was heading right back to Jack's house. My hands clenched into fists. That was it. The final straw. I knew confronting them wasn't enough. No yelling, no accusations, no messy fights would make up for what they'd done. I wanted them to feel the betrayal. I wanted them to suffer the way I was suffering. And that's when the plan started forming in my head. A plan that would make them regret every single lie, every single touch, every moment they thought they were getting away with it. And soon, they'd find out. Once I had all the evidence I needed, the question wasn't if I was going to do something about it, it was how. I couldn't just confront them and expect some half-baked apology, and I definitely wasn't going to be the pathetic husband who sat back and let it slide. No, they needed to pay. I spent a lot of sleepless nights going over different scenarios in my head. Should I confront them in public? Should I go straight to Jack's wife and let her handle it? Maybe just pack my bags and walk away without a word? None of it felt right. They had lied to me, humiliated me, and walked all over the trust I gave them. This wasn't just about exposing them. It was about making them feel the weight of their choices. And then it hit me. I didn't need to confront them. I needed to trap them. See, what Sarah didn't know about me was my past. Before settling into the life she knew, I worked for a special operations unit. Surveillance, intelligence gathering, infiltration, stuff that made catching cheaters seem like child's play. I wasn't just some clueless husband. I had the skills to turn their little affair into a nightmare they wouldn't escape from. I started thinking about how I could create a scenario that would turn their lies against them. What if I planted evidence that made them look guilty of something much worse, something they couldn't explain away so easily? I had access to more than enough tools to pull it off: hidden cameras, tracking devices, even burner phones I still had from back in the day. The idea started taking shape. I'd create a situation where they wouldn't just be exposed, but they'd be the prime suspects in something bigger, something that would make them sweat, question everything, and ultimately destroy the perfect little illusion they had built. I imagined Sarah's face when the police showed up at Jack's house. The confusion, the panic, the realization that her little affair wasn't just a dirty secret anymore. I pictured Jack trying to talk his way out of it, his cocky grin turning into desperation. The thought alone was almost enough to satisfy me, but it wasn't just about revenge. It was about control. They thought they had the upper hand, sneaking around behind my back, laughing at my expense. They had no idea that I was 10 steps ahead of them now, and when I pulled the trigger on this plan, they'd never see it coming. I wasn't rushing into this. I was going to be careful, methodical, and patient. Sarah and Jack thought they were playing a game, but they had no idea who they were up against. I sat there in my office that night, staring at the blank notepad in front of me, and slowly, piece by piece, I started writing it all down. Every step, every detail, every move I would make, I was done being the fool. It was time to turn the tables. Once I had my plan laid out, it was time to put things in motion. This wasn't just about catching them in the act, it was about orchestrating their downfall in a way they'd never forget. If Sarah and Jack wanted to play games, I was about to show them how it's really done. The first step was setting the stage. I deliberately broke down my car in Nicholas Park, an area far enough from our home, but still close enough to be suspicious. I left it on the side of the road with the hood popped open, making it look like I had abandoned it in a hurry. Inside, I carefully planted just enough to get the ball rolling. My wallet with only my ID missing, a half-finished coffee cup, and a burner phone with cryptic messages I had sent to myself from an anonymous number. The texts were vague, just enough to create doubt if the police got involved. Stuff like, I can't do this anymore, and we need to figure this out before it's too late. Enough to make them wonder what the hell I'd been up to, and more importantly, how Sarah and Jack fit into it. I then disappeared for the day. I left my personal phone at home, powered off, knowing Sarah would eventually notice and panic. I took the train out to Philadelphia, made sure I was nowhere near town, and sat back, waiting for the inevitable. Sure enough, it didn't take long. By noon, Sarah was blowing up my phone with texts, voicemails, and frantic messages. I didn't respond. Instead, I watched the tracker I had hidden in her car as she drove straight to Jack's house. Right on cue, with Sarah out of the house, I took the opportunity to up the stakes. I placed a few choice pieces of evidence in her closet. A man's watch that wasn't mine, a hotel receipt tucked into an old purse, and an unfamiliar key that led to nowhere. Next, I made sure Jack got his fair share of paranoia too. I planted an envelope in his car containing printed photos of him and Sarah together, taken from my hidden cameras, along with an anonymous note that read, "She's not yours, she never was." I could only imagine the look on his face when he found it. Everything was set in place like a finely tuned machine, and the best part, they had no idea I was behind it all. By the end of the day, Sarah called me more than 20 times, each voicemail getting more and more frantic. "Alex, where the hell are you? Please call me. This isn't funny." Jack, on the other hand, wasn't as subtle. He left me a voicemail that was a mixture of anger and fear, his voice shaking. "Dude, call me back. I don't know what's going on, but this isn't cool." Oh, it was definite. By the time the police found my abandoned car, Sarah and Jack were knee-deep in confusion and panic, exactly where I wanted them. I could already see the cracks forming. The pressure was building, and soon they'd start turning on each other. They thought they had control. They thought they could get away with it, but I was pulling the strings now. It didn't take long for the police to get involved. I made sure of that. A stranded car with personal belongings left inside, that kind of thing doesn't go unnoticed, especially in a place like Nicholas Park. It's not exactly a high crime area, so when my abandoned vehicle was found, it raised eyebrows. Detective John Robinson was assigned to the case, a seasoned guy, mid-50s, with a face that looked like he'd seen it all. But this was different. He called Sarah first. And I imagine the moment she picked up that call, her world started crumbling. From what I gathered later, she told the detective she thought I was in Chicago for work. Classic Sarah, cool and collected, always ready with an excuse. But when they pressed her about why my car was sitting abandoned and why some of my belongings were scattered inside, I could tell from the way her texts were blowing up that she was panicking. She came home that evening looking pale, her usual confident stride replaced with nervous pacing. I watched her from the couch as she rubbed her temples, phone in hand, muttering under her breath. Then she turned to me and asked, "Alex, did you leave your car in Nicholas Park?" I shrugged. "What? No. Why would I?" The look on her face was priceless. Confused, scared, and just barely holding it together. Because the police found it there. They called me. I leaned back, playing dumb. Weird. Maybe someone stole it. Her eyes darted all over the place like she was searching for answers in thin air. She was trying to make sense of it, but she couldn't because she thought she knew everything. That's what made it perfect. A few days later, Detective Robinson showed up at our house. I answered the door, all innocent smiles and polite greetings. He cut straight to the point, asking if I had been to Nicholas Park recently. I gave him my best confused face. "No, sir, I've been away on business. My wife can confirm." Sarah, standing behind me, stiffened. She nodded, but I could tell she was already sweating bullets. Then, the detective asked the kicker. Do you know a Jack Thompson? Almost laughed right there. Yeah, he's one of my best friends. Why? He didn't answer right away, just flipped open his little notebook and scribbled something down. That's when I saw Sarah's face out of the corner of my eye. She was holding her breath, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, eyes darting between me and the detective. They had nothing solid yet, but they were sniffing around, and that was enough to get Sarah spiraling. After the detective left, she sat me down and tried to talk things through, acting like a concerned wife. Babe, is there anything I should know? Are you in trouble or something? I gave her a blank stare. Sarah, what the hell are you talking about? I should be asking you that. Boom. Just like that, I flipped the script. Now, she stammered, backpedaled, tried to act like she was just worried about me, but I could see it in her eyes. She was scared. Scared that maybe I knew more than I was letting on. Meanwhile, Jack was losing it too. I could tell from the text Sarah was sending him when she thought I wasn't looking. Messages like, "We need to talk, ASAP," and "I don't know what's happening, but stay cool." Stay cool? They were anything but cool. The pressure was building. Detective Robinson was poking around, Sarah and Jack were panicking, and I was sitting back, watching it all unfold like a spectator at my own revenge movie. And the best part? I was just getting started. Things were unraveling fast, and I could see it in the way Sarah carried herself. The once confident, bubbly woman who always had an answer for everything was now jumpy, distracted, and visibly stressed. It was beautiful to watch. The police investigation was heating up, and every time Sarah's phone rang, she practically jumped out of her skin. She and Jack were denying everything, of course, but the evidence I had carefully planted kept them pinned into a corner. The items I left in her closet, the burner phone I had hidden in her car with those cryptic messages, it was all coming together perfectly. One evening, Sarah came home looking exhausted, dumping her purse onto the counter and collapsing into a chair. She ran a hand through her hair and sighed heavily. Alex, this is getting out of hand. I played dumb. What's getting out of hand? She shot me an irritated glance. You know what I mean. The police keep calling me, asking all these weird questions about you and Jack. I don't understand what's happening. I leaned against the counter, keeping my voice calm. I don't know, Sarah. Maybe they think you're hiding something. Her eyes widened and she stammered, What? Why would they think that? I shrugged, taking a sip of my drink, enjoying every second of her unraveling. She was cracking under the weight of the lies she had buried herself in, and all I had to do was keep pushing. Meanwhile, Jack was breaking down too. He texted me a couple times, pretending everything was normal, but I could tell from the tone of his messages that he was sweating bullets. The guy went from confident and smug to desperate in no time flat. One day, I accidentally left my phone unlocked on the coffee table when I went to take a shower, making sure Sarah could see the text I had planted from a fake number. "We know everything. Meet me tonight. Don't tell Sarah." When I came back, she was staring at the screen, pale as a ghost. She looked up at me with wide eyes and whispered, "Who sent this?" I grabbed my phone, glanced at it, and smirked. "I don't know. Maybe you should ask Jack." Her face drained of color. "What the hell does that mean, Alex?" I just shook my head and walked away, leaving her sitting there, spiraling in paranoia. The beauty of it all was that they couldn't talk to each other without raising suspicion. Jack was dodging her calls, and Sarah was too afraid to confront me directly. I had them isolated, trapped in their own web of deceit. And the more they squirmed, the better it felt. The pressure was mounting, and soon enough, something was going to crack. And when it did, I'd be right there to watch it all come crashing down. As much as I enjoyed watching Sarah and Jack squirm under the weight of my carefully laid trap, something started gnawing at me. Sitting alone at night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, I was going too far. Don't get me wrong, I still hated them for what they did. The lies, the betrayal, the smug looks they probably exchanged behind my back, it all made me sick. But as I watched Sarah unravel before my eyes, something inside me hesitated. I thought back to the life we built together, 7 years of memories, good times, laughter, and dreams we shared. Was I really getting satisfaction out of this, or was I just feeding my own bitterness? The old me, the guy Sarah fell in love with, probably wouldn't have gone this far, but the guy I was now, the one who had spent sleepless nights replaying the humiliation over and over again in his head, he wanted blood. Still, doubts crept in. Was I ruining my own life in the process? Was I turning into someone I wouldn't recognize once this was all over? I'd sit in the kitchen late at night, staring at my laptop, going over the evidence I had planted, wondering if I should just end it now. Let them know I was on to them, walk away with my dignity intact and move on. But every time I thought about stopping, I'd see Sarah laughing on one of Jack's doorbell cam recordings, slipping into his house like she belonged there. I clenched my fists, reminding myself why I was doing this in the first place. They deserved every ounce of hell I was putting them through, but I also couldn't ignore the part of me that wondered, when all of this was over, would I feel any better? Would exposing them really fill the hole they left in me? I started questioning everything, the trust I once had, the love I thought was real, the friends I believed would never betray me. Was it all fake? Or was I just too blind to see it falling apart long before the affair? There were moments when I almost picked up the phone, ready to confront Sarah once and for all, just to put an end to this madness. But I didn't. I wasn't ready to let go of my revenge just yet. And then there was the fear. The fear that if I backed off now, if I showed weakness, Sarah and Jack would walk away thinking they had won. And I couldn't let that happen. I wouldn't let that happen. So I pushed those doubts deep down, buried them under the anger and pain that kept me going. I told myself I was doing this for justice. Not just for me, but for every person who's been betrayed by the people they trust the most. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't just fighting them. I was fighting myself. Despite my inner conflict, I kept the wheels in motion. The pressure I had built up around Sarah and Jack was finally reaching its breaking point, and soon the situation escalated beyond anything they could handle. The police investigation, the planted evidence, the fake messages, it all led to one inevitable conclusion: the courtroom. The day they were brought in for questioning, I watched from a distance, sitting in my car outside the station. Sarah looked exhausted, her once perfect hair now messy, dark circles under her eyes. Jack, he looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. Good, they deserved it. Detective Robinson had done his job well. With all the evidence I'd left behind, it was easy for the authorities to put two and two together. Suspicious items in their cars and homes, the burner phone I planted in Sarah's purse, the records that showed her being in places she couldn't explain, it all pointed to them. They were prime suspects in a fabricated scheme that only I truly understood. Sarah and Jack, of course, denied everything. They claimed they had no idea what was going on, that it was all a misunderstanding, and that they had nothing to do with my disappearance. But you know how it is. When the evidence lines up just a little too perfectly, no one believes your side of the story. In court, the prosecutor painted a picture that made them look guilty as hell. The judge listened intently as photos, text messages, and fabricated hotel reservations were presented. Jack sat there, sweating through his cheap suit, while Sarah, dressed in her most conservative outfit, kept glancing at me, hoping for some kind of reaction. I gave her nothing. No emotion, no sympathy, just a blank stare. Their lawyers did their best, trying to poke holes in the investigation, but I had covered my tracks too well. Every piece of evidence I planted fit perfectly into the narrative I wanted them to believe. Sarah's name was all over the supposed missing person report the police had initially filed when they found my abandoned car. Jack's texts, crafted by yours truly, made him sound like a desperate man caught in the middle of a scandal. The judge didn't sentence them to jail, but the community service and mandatory counseling were enough to leave a lasting scar. They walked out of that courtroom not as innocent victims, but as two people whose reputations were completely shattered. The whispers, the stares, the humiliation, exactly what they deserved. Sarah tried to talk to me afterward, her eyes filled with desperation. Alex, you have to believe me. I didn't do anything. This is insane. I looked her dead in the eye and said, I believed you once, Sarah, and look where that got me. Then I walked away. Jack? He couldn't even look at me. He just stood there, running his hand through his hair, muttering under his breath. And me? I felt victorious. I had pulled off something most people wouldn't dare dream of. I exposed them, humiliated them, and left them in ruins. But as I drove home that night, alone with my thoughts, something unexpected crept in. Emptiness. I won, so why didn't it feel like it? In the weeks that followed the trial, I should have felt triumphant. Sarah and Jack were disgraced, their reputations shredded, and life was moving on without them. People whispered behind their backs at the grocery store. Jack lost a few key clients at his firm, and Sarah, well, let's just say the local PTA wasn't exactly thrilled to have a suspect in their midst. But something gnawed at me. That lingering doubt I had tried to suppress before, the question of whether I'd gone too far, was back, and this time it wasn't letting up. One night, I found myself sitting at my desk, staring at the mountain of evidence I had collected and fabricated. The photos, the texts, the staged calls. I ran my fingers over the files, and for the first time, it all felt hollow. I realized that despite my carefully orchestrated revenge, I still didn't have real closure. Sure, I made him pay, but what did I really accomplish? Was I truly free of Sarah, or was I just another prisoner of my own anger? That's when I made a decision that surprised even me. I picked up the phone and called Detective Robinson. It was late, but I knew he'd answer. He had grown invested in the case, after all. "Detective, there's something you should know," I said, my voice steady but distant. There was a pause. "Alex? What's going on?" "I set it all up," I admitted, exhaling slowly. "Sarah and Jack, they were cheating, yeah. But the evidence, the texts, the planted stuff, it was all me." The line went quiet. I could hear him processing, probably replaying everything he had worked on for weeks. Finally, he spoke. "Why?" "Because they deserved to feel what I felt," I said, swallowing hard. "I wanted them to lose everything like I did. I wanted them to hurt." There was a long silence, and then he sighed. "You realize this could have legal consequences, Alex. You tampered with an investigation." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I know, but it's the truth, and I couldn't live with it hanging over my head." To my surprise, Robinson wasn't angry. In fact, he sounded almost sympathetic. "Look, I can't condone what you did, but I get it. Betrayal does things to people. I'll report this, but I'll leave out the worst of it." I didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. I hung up the phone and sat there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Sarah and Jack were exonerated within a few days, but the damage was done. Even though they were cleared, their reputations were still in the gutter. The whispers didn't stop, and people didn't forget. Sarah, of course, tried to reach out again. I saw her name pop up on my phone, and for once I didn't hesitate. I answered. "Why, Alex?" she asked, her voice broken. "Why did you do this to us?" I didn't give her the satisfaction of an apology. Instead, I said, "I did what I thought was right at the time, but you did this to yourself long before I ever did anything." She didn't argue. She knew it was true. I hung up and finally felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Maybe it wasn't the cleanest ending, but it was the ending I needed. No more lies, no more revenge, just me finally moving on. Coming clean should have made me feel lighter, right? I thought once I confess, I'd finally be able to put all of this behind me. But reality had other plans. Sarah and Jack were exonerated. Sure, the charges were dropped and their records were cleared, but their reputations ruined. No amount of legal paperwork could erase the doubt that lingered in people's minds. And even though I admitted to fabricating evidence, no one fully trusted them again. Sarah tried to go back to her old life, showing up at social events, trying to act like nothing happened, but it wasn't the same. Friends looked at her differently. Some outright avoided her. The same people who once admired her picture-perfect marriage were now whispering behind her back at the grocery store. And Jack? He didn't just lose face, he lost everything. His marriage was over, his job was gone, and last I heard he moved in with his brother in another town. Despite all that, I could see it in Sarah's eyes when we crossed paths. She wasn't sorry for what she did, she was sorry she got caught. She still had that entitled, indignant look, like she was the victim in all of this. She tried reaching out a few more times after the phone call. First it was text messages, then emails, all variations of the same tired excuses. "We were in a rough patch. It didn't mean anything. I still love you." I never responded. What was the point? We were too far gone and the damage was irreversible. But here's the kicker. My own actions didn't come without consequences either. I became that guy, the one who took things too far. Some friends looked at me with a mix of admiration and concern, but others, they kept their distance. Some called me calculated, others obsessive. A few of them even suggested therapy, which honestly wasn't the worst idea. My job wasn't thrilled with the attention either. While they couldn't fire me for what I did in my personal life, I could tell my boss was wary of me now. I got passed over for a promotion I was gunning for, and the office gossip painted me as the crazy ex-husband. It stung, but I accepted it. After all, I did this to myself. And then there was the loneliness. For all the satisfaction my revenge brought me, it left me standing alone in the end. I had spent so much time focused on taking Sarah and Jack down that I hadn't thought about what came after. Who was I without all the anger and betrayal fueling me? I started reflecting on my choices, wondering if I had crossed the line between justified payback and sheer obsession. Maybe I did. Maybe I let my pain dictate my actions too much. But despite all that, I didn't regret it. Not one bit. They had it coming. They played with fire, and I made damn sure they got burned. The only thing I knew for sure, it was time to move on. For real this time. No more living in the past. No more seeking validation from people who didn't deserve a second thought. The mess was over. The question now was, where do I go from here? Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Tell me what you think about that story. Have a good day, and bye.